I'm just going to commence with the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Ba'ed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom for all eternity. And you shall love Adonai, your God, with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength and resource. And these words which I command you today are to be on your heart, and you're to teach them diligently to your children, and to speak of them when you sit in your home, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Bind them on as a sign on your hand, and they are to be in your frontlets between your eyes, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And the entire Torah and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Psalms 67. May God be gracious to us and bless us, and may he cause his face to shine on us, so that your ways may be known to the earth, and your salvation among all nations. And let the peoples praise you. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you will judge the peoples fairly and guide the nations of the earth. We ask you clearly that you will guide New Zealand and its government. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. Let the earth shall yield its harvest, and God, our God, will bless us. God will bless us. God will bless you, and all the ends of the earth will fear him.
Yeah, thank you, Lord.
Wonderful. Well, we'll commence the parasha readings from the Torah, commencing with Bereshit, or Genesis 37.
Good morning and Shabbat Shalom. Now Jacob dwelled in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the genealogies of Jacob. When Joseph was 17 years old, he was a youth. He was shepherding the flocks with his brothers, with the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. Joseph brought back a bad report from them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. So he had made him a long-sleeved tunic. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak to him in shalom. Then Joseph dreamed a dream and told his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Please listen to this dream I dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the middle of the field, and all of a sudden my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Will you truly be our king over us?" His brothers said to him. "Will you really rule over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and because of his words. But then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "I have just dreamed another dream. Suddenly there was the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowing down to me." He told it to his father as well as his brothers. Then his father rebuked him and said to him, "What's this dream you dreamed? Will we really come, your mother and I and your brothers, to bow down to the ground to you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the speech in mind. Then his brothers went to graze their father's flocks in Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, "Aren't your brothers grazing the flocks in Shechem? Come, let me send you to them." "Here I am," he said. Then he said to him, "Go now, check on the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flocks, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. A man found him there wandering the field, and the man asked him, "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers," he said. "Please tell me where they're grazing." The man said, "They moved on from here, for I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan.
Now they saw him from a distance. Before he was close to them, they plotted together against him in order to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes the master of dreams. Come on now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those pits, so we can say that an evil animal devoured him. Then let's see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben heard and rescued him out of their hands, saying, "We must not beat him to death." In order to rescue him from their hand and to return him to his father, Reuben said to them, "Don't shed blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." So as soon as Joseph came up to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the long-sleeved tunic that he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, with no water in it. Then they sat down to eat bread. When they looked up, behold, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balsam, and myrrh, going to bring them down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come on. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let's not lay our hand on him, since he's our brother, our own flesh." His brothers listened to him. When some men, Midianite merchants, passed by, they dragged Joseph up out of the pit, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes. Then he returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and I, where should I go?" So they took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a billy goat, and they dipped the tunic into the blood. Then they sent the long-sleeved tunic, and it was brought to their father, and they said, "We found this. Do you recognize whether it is not? It is your son's tunic?" He did recognize it and said, "My son's tunic. An evil animal has devoured him. Joseph must be torn to pieces." Jacob tore his clothing and put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. All his sons got up along with his daughters to console him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, "For I will go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." So his father kept weeping for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him into Egypt to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, the commander of the bodyguards.
Chapter 38. About that time Judah went down from his brothers, and he camped near a Dulamite man whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a Canaanite woman whose name was Shua, and he took her as wife and slept with her. Then she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and he named him She became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, and she called him Onan. She gave birth to yet another son, and she called him Shelah. He was a Hezib when she gave birth. She was in Hezib when she gave birth to him. Then Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in Adonai's eyes, so Adonai put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go to your brother's wife to perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up seed for your brother." But Onan knew that the seed would not be his. So every time he went to his brother's wife, he would destroy it on the ground, so as not to provide a seed for his brother. What he did was evil in Adonai's eyes, so he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up," because he thought, otherwise he too might die like his brothers. So Tamar went and stayed in her father's house. Now the days became many, and Shuah's daughter, Judah's wife, died. After Judah consoled himself, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friends, Hirah the Adullamite. Then Tamar was told, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his flocks." And she removed her widow's clothes from herself, covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself, and sat by the entrance to the springs on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, because she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her along the way and said, "Please let me sleep with you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. "What?" she asked. What will you give me to sleep with you?" "I will send you a young goat from the flock," he said. "Provided you give a pledge until you send it," she said. "What kind of pledge shall I give you?" he asked. "Your seal and your cord and your staff in your hand," she said. So he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she got pregnant by him. After she had got up and left, she removed her veil from herself and put on her widow's clothes. When Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he could not find her. He asked the men of her area, saying, "Where is the cult prostitute?" "She was at the springs along the way." But they said, "There hasn't been a cult prostitute here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I couldn't find her." And the people of that place also said, "There hasn't been a cult prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, or will be held in contempt. Behold, I did send this young goat, but you couldn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has been a prostitute. Look, she's even pregnant by prostitution." "Bring her out," Judah said. "Let her be burned." And as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, saying, "I'm pregnant by the man to whom these things belong." Then she said, "Do you recognize whose these are? The seal, the cords, the staff?" Then Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I didn't give her to my son Shelah." He was not intimate with her again. Now when it was time for her to give birth, behold, there were twins in her womb. While she was giving birth, one stuck his hand out, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it onto his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But as he was pulling his hand back in, behold, his brother came out. So she said, "How you have broken through! The breach is because of you." And he named him Perez. Afterward his brother, on whose hand was the scarlet thread, came out, and he named him Zerah.
Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt. Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, commander of the bodyguards, bought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. But Adonai was with Joseph, so he became a successful man in the house of his master, the Egyptian. His master saw that Adonai was with him, and that Adonai made everything he set his hand to successful. Joseph found favour in his eyes, so he served him as a personal servant and made him an overseer over his household. Everything that was his he entrusted into his hand. From that time that he made him an overseer in his house and over everything that belonged to him, Adonai blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. Adonai's blessing was on everything that belonged to him in the house and in the field. So he released everything he owned into Joseph's hand, with him in charge. He did not think about anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and handsome in appearance. Now after these things, the master's wife lifted up her eyes at Joseph and said, "Come, lie down with me." But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "my master doesn't think about anything in the house with me in charge, and everything that belongs to him he's entrusted into my hand. No one in this house is greater than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I commit this great evil and sin against God?" So whenever she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her invitation to lie down beside her, to be with her. Now on one such day he came into the house to do his work, and none of the people of the house were there in the house. Then she grabbed him by his garment, saying, "Come, lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand, fled, and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she screamed to the men of her house and said to them, "Look, someone brought a Hebrew man to us to fall with us. He approached me to lie with me, so I screamed out loud. When he heard me raise my voice and scream, he left his garment with me, fled, and went outside." Then she kept the garment with her until his master came home. She spoke the same words to him, saying, "The Hebrew slave that you brought us approached me to fall with me. When I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment with me and fled outside." Now when his master heard the words his wife spoke to him, saying, "Such are the things your slave did to me," his anger burned. Then Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So there he was in the prison. But Adonai was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the eyes of the commander of the prison. The commander of the prison entrusted into Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison, so that everything that was done there, he was responsible for it. The commander of the prison did not concern himself with anything at all under his care, because Adonai was with him, and Adonai made whatever he did successful.
Now it was after these things that the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, with the chief of the cupbearers and with the chief of the bakers. So he put them in custody of the house of the commander of the bodyguards, in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. The commander of the bodyguards assigned Joseph to be with them and served them as their personal servant. They were in custody for some time. Then the two of them each dreamed a dream on the same night. The dream of each man, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each had its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he observed them, and there they were, looking miserable. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were with him in the custody of the house of his master, saying, "Why are your faces so sad today?" They said to him, "We dreamed a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Please tell me." So the chief of the cupbearers told his dream to Joseph, saying to him, "In my dream, suddenly there was a vine in front of me. On the vine were 3 branches, and as it was budding, its blossoms came out, its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in Pharaoh's palm." "This is its interpretation," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches, they are 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. Then you'll put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do before when you were his cupbearer. But if you remember that I was with you when it goes well with you, please show me kindness and mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was forcibly kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing at all that they should put me in this pit." When the chief of the bakers saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also was in my dream. Expectantly, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the top basket was food for Pharaoh, all kinds of baked goods. But the birds were eating them from the basket on my head." Then Joseph answered him and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets, they are 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head off of you, and you will hang on a tree. Then the birds will eat your flesh off of you." Then it happened on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, that he held a banquet for all his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief of cupbearers and the head of the chief of the bakers among his servants. He restored the chief of the cupbearers as his cupbearer, and he put the cup on the palm of Pharaoh's hand. But the chief of the bakers he hung. It was just as Joseph had interpreted for them. Yet the chief of cupbearers did not remember Joseph. Indeed, he forgot him.
Interesting readings so far. Kind of hard to get your head around some of that stuff, isn't it? Wow. And they were men of God. Hallelujah. Saved by the goodness of God. And all can say is sometimes, there go I. So it's important that we stay close to God. And He's faithful in His forgiveness. So the next part of the readings are the Haftarah. Very good, exciting. So, Amos, and then Joel.
Amos chapter 2 verse 6. Thus says Adonai, for 3 crimes of Israel, even for 4, I will not relent. For they sell the righteous for silver, and the needy for a pair of shoes. They trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth, and thwart the way of the humble. A man and his father go to the same girl, to profane my holy name. Upon the garments taken in pledge, they stretch out beside every altar, and drink wine confiscated as fines in the house of their gods. I destroyed the Amorites before them, whose height was like cedars and as strong as oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above and his roots from beneath. It was I who brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you 40 years in the wilderness to possess the Amorites' land. I raised up prophets from your sons and Nazarites from your young men. Is this not so, B'nai Yisrael? Declares Adonai. But you gave Nazarites wine to drink, and you commanded the prophets, saying, do not prophesy. Behold, I will cause a tottering beneath you as a cart totters when full of sheaves. Then flight will fail for the swift. The mighty will not strengthen his power. The warrior will not save his life. The archer will not stand. The fleet-footed will not escape. The horseman will not save himself. The valiant among the warriors will flee naked in that day, declares Adonai. In chapter 3, the prophet reveals destruction. Hear this word that Adonai has spoken against you, B'nai Israel, against the whole family that I brought up from the land of Egypt, saying, only you have I known from among all the families of the earth. Therefore, I will punish you for all your iniquities. Can two walk together unless they meet by appointment? Does a lion roar in the forest when he has no prey? Does a young lion growl from his den unless he has taken prey? Does a bird fall into a trap on the ground if it has no bait? Will a snare spring up from the ground without taking anything? If a shofar alarm sounds in the city, will people not tremble? Has Adonai not caused it? For the Lord Adonai will do nothing unless he has revealed his counsel to his servants, the prophets. A lion has roared, who will not hear? My Lord Adonai has spoken, who shall not prophesy?
Promise of the Ruach Adonai, Joel 3. So it will be afterward, I will pour out my Ruach on all flesh. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. That's great for us, isn't it? Your young men will see visions. Also on the male and the female servants will I pour out my spirit in those days. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day of Adonai comes. Then all who call on Adonai's name will escape. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be rescue, as Adonai has said, among the survivors whom Adonai is calling.
I'm going to do something a little different this morning. We had a privilege on Monday night of meeting with the Ambassador of New Zealand. And it's always a privilege to have someone from Israel. And it was just a really good time just to be able to honour him and also hear from his heart on how he sees things through the Middle East. And it was just a great time of seeing, and our Deputy Mayor spoke about his recent travels with his wife to Israel. And it's very good just to see a great interest in the things that are happening over there. And you've probably followed the news about the US president, Mr. Trump, announcing that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and that has actually been in place in the statutes in the US for 21 years. It just hasn't been put forward into place in terms of the various presidents. They've got a bit nervous, and the previous president went against the wishes of the government in the US and tried to put a stop on that whole thing in the UN. And that's why the first time any president has abstained from vetoing the actions was undertaken by Barack Obama to try and thwart the position of Jerusalem being the eternal capital of Jerusalem. And so now wonderfully, and everyone is kind of forgetting that. They don't want to kind of know that. But it's actually always been on the US government statutes. So it's just bringing it to the fore, and it's time some different ones have become brave. And I would encourage you to write to Mr. Winston Peters, who is our foreign minister, to remind him of the promises and the various statements he made prior to the elections in terms of supporting Israel. And so you might like to do that and remind him quite clearly of the benefits of doing so for New Zealand. So it's a rather exciting times. But anyway, I'll just play something that I played there.
Thanks, John. Okay, so Acts 2 from 14. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. Fellow Judeans and all who are staying in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and pay attention to my words. These men are not drunk, as you suppose, for it's only the 3rd hour of the day. But this is what was spoken about through the prophet Joel. And it shall be in the last days, says God, that I will pour out my ruach on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even on my slaves, male and female, I will pour out my ruach in those days, and they shall prophesy. And I will give wonders in the sky above, and signs on the earth beneath, blood and fire and smoky vapour. The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the great and glorious day of Adonai comes. And it shall be that everyone who calls on the name of Adonai shall be saved.
Morning. The patriarchs became jealous of Joseph and sold him into Egypt. Yet God was with him. He rescued him out of all his troubles and granted him favour and wisdom before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who made him governor over Egypt and all his household. Famine and great suffering came all over all Egypt, in Canaan, and our fathers could find no food. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our fathers there for the first time. On the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and his family became known to Pharaoh. So Joseph sent and called for Jacob and all his relatives, 75 persons. Jacob went down to Egypt and died, he and our fathers. They were carried to Shechem and laid in the tomb that Abraham had bought for a sum of money from the sons of Hamor in Shechem.
Well, I trust you've enjoyed reading some of those things throughout the week as well. I really encourage each one of us to not just wait till Shabbat to read the scriptures. I really encourage, it's important that we have a good feed right throughout the week. And there's so much in the scriptures right through. You know, it's marvellous. We don't cover everything here on Shabbat or in other times of Torah studies, but there is just so much in the scriptures, and it's all from God. So I really encourage you, just spend time. And spend time chatting with your Father. He loves to hear from us. Be ready to just sit and spend some time just talking to Yeshua and hearing his voice. It's so important. Well, last week's parasha, Vayishlach, which means he sent, it provided a wonderful example of the process of restoring a broken relationship. Jacob first had his own personal encounter. That was interesting, and we reminded with God and had a name changed to Israel. And it's important that we have our own account as well, so that we actually know who our God is, and that he's totally part of us, and helps us to really focus on what he wants us to do. He was prepared to accept the consequence of his actions, which was stealing his brother's Esau's birthright and blessing. It's an interesting thing we often need to think about. Are we prepared to sometimes take some of the consequences of the actions we take? Yes, God forgives, as I've said before, but there are sometimes aspects which do have a spin-off, and we've got to grin and bear them and work through them. Occasionally, God is gracious and makes it disappear. But he is not a magician. We've got to get that in our heads, that when we come to God, it's not about him waving a wand or anything like that. He's wanting to build and establish things in us so that we are strong disciples and so that we can go and make disciples. He approached Esau with humility and a request for forgiveness. The result was Esau greeted him and forgave him and received a good gift from Jacob as well. And just on that note, be gracious in receiving gifts. Sometimes we say, oh, no, I don't need that. But giving gifts is not just about the person who is going to give them or receive it. It's often about the person wanting to bless the person who's wanting to give. Okay? Sometimes it's an important thing we need to realise. It's a two-way thing. Because that's what families are about. That's what friends are about. It's two-way street. It wasn't long before they both had to bury their father, Isaac. And they did it together. And then they went their separate ways. Yeshua stressed the importance of reconciliation and forgiveness. And hence it's very important for our spiritual walk and being holy and righteous. Because Yeshua said, be holy as I am holy. It's important that we walk in his ways and that we are quick to forgive and we're quick to ask forgiveness. And we're quick to restore relationship and maintain, in order to maintain our freedom in Yeshua. That's what it talks about, to stay free in the liberty of Yeshua, okay? Where does he set you free? And that requires some things on our part to do sometimes. Otherwise, we will still lock ourselves up. It's important that you don't. It's important to stay free. And equally important, we need to be ready for his return. Okay? And that's part of being part of the 5 wise virgins, not the 5 foolish virgins. So a lot of those things do tie up, because we want to make sure that our name's in the book and that we're going to be with him when he comes. Okay? Really important. So this week's parashah, Vayeshev, means and he lived or dwelt. We see that Jacob, along with his 12 sons and his one daughter, they settled into Canaan. It was an ancient Egyptian term, Canaan, and referred to an area which encompasses Israel. It actually also included Lebanon, northwestern Jordan, and some areas of Syria. So it's quite a large area. So when you're thinking of Israel, it's not just that little sliver, which is kind of about 80 kilometres wide and about 280 kilometres long. And, if you're real fast, you could probably visit the whole thing in a day. But it's a wonderful place to go and visit. And even live. And there's about 8.5 million people that live there in that place. And there's still more space for more people. So it's good. And after the age of the patriarchs, this area became known as Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, or the Holy Land. And the use of the Hebrew word, yeshiv, indicates that Jacob and his family truly settled into Canaan. It infers putting down deep roots and living there, rather than just resting temporarily while on a journey to another destination. And in Israel, a settlement today is actually called a yeshuv. And Jacob was in his latter days designed to live peacefully and experience a sense of permanence or home. And most women definitely understand that, the importance of having a place they can call home, and they can rest. It's very important. In fact, that's what most people seek, a place to call home, rest. And as we indicated last week, in the update on his life, he'd already been through more than his fair share of trials and tribulations. His brother threatened to kill him. His father-in-law deceived and cheated him. He was tricked into marrying the woman who was supposed to be his sister-in-law, and the wife that he actually did really love actually died in childbirth. And his daughter was sadly raped. But that's not the end of his troubles. And as we talked about last week, yes, he desired to marry Rachel. But it's interesting that God's intention, as he was now the head of the family, because he had stolen the birthright, his responsibility was to marry the oldest daughter. And hence through Leah came the line of the kings and our Messiah, Yeshua. Okay? So his ways are very different from our ways at times. And we've got to kind of get our head around that a little. And in this parasha, Joseph, Jacob's favourite son, is actually sold by his brothers to slave traders for 20 pieces of silver. They then led Jacob to believe that Joseph was killed by a wild animal. And considering what went wrong in this family, the rabbis actually, over the centuries, do not actually lay the blame entirely at Joseph's brothers' feet. They also place some responsibility on Jacob, who loved and favoured Joseph more than any of other's sons. This favouritism caused his brothers to envy and hate him. This actually was based in Jacob's 4 wives, Bilhah, Zilpah, Rachel and Leah, who each strived to be the preferred wife, and Rachel was the wife that he had chosen, the one he loved best. In Judaism, Shalom Bayit, peace in the home, is a revered concept of central importance. And this parasha exposes a few factors that can disturb peace in a home. Favoritism is one of them. And that sows discord in a family. Or in today's terms, preferential treatment is one factor of a dysfunctional family. That's interesting, isn't it? You've got to be very careful. Someone said we have favourites as part of it. That's one thing that Sharon and I just made sure that we just don't do. You know, it's we love all equally, and including our beautiful foster daughter, and including some other beautiful daughters that we have living with us. It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's important that we actually show impartiality, show love and care to all, because it can affect people's lives and futures. The Torah portion also reveals perhaps some of the difficulties that blended families encounter. It's amazing, isn't it? Maintaining peace in the home can be a challenge when diverse personalities and relationships are involved. And of course, families that do not have, are blended, do experience this. And it's really important that they actually see and work even harder to make sure that the families blend in. Because it can create havoc. And that's not God's intention. So it's important to work on it. Work at it. And men, unfortunately, it's our responsibility to work even harder to make sure that happens. Even if we get it in the neck sometimes. Get the violin out, shall I? Get the violin out. Oh, I've got to bleed sometime. That's good. Families are great. Considering the fact that even an ordinary one person, just husband and wife's, what is it? Monogamous, that's a big word, isn't it? Monogamous marriage can be very challenging. We can only imagine how difficult it was to maintain shalom bayit, or peace, in Jacob's household with 4 wives. Whew! Man. I'm sure that some can relate to this. Today, countless families are blended and step families. Just one example of modern day family dynamics. Often children are forced to take sides, sadly, in conflicts between parents, while children's feelings and thoughts are ignored, discounted, and criticised. And that's why it's so important, especially as people grow up, to make sure that you treat each one nicely, fairly, honourably, look after them, love them. And in blended families, you've got to even work harder at doing it. And it's not easy at times. But that's part of it. Because a few weeks ago we asked the question, what do you want to be remembered for? And I think that's a big thing often we should think about. What do I want to be remembered for? What inheritance do I want to leave? You know, it's a really important thing. What will people say? Is he generous in spirit? Is he kind with his words? It's the thing I remind the wonderful older folk at the retirement homes that we visit. Make sure, I said, look, if you want visitors, if you want your grandchildren to come, be kind, be nice, generous. As a young man, Joseph, like his father and brothers, they were shepherds. While we don't ordinarily associate shepherding with greatness, this parasha actually reveals that Joseph was a man of tremendous vision. And although his prophetic dreams imparted to him a revelation of God's plan for his life, when he told his brothers about those dreams, it caused conflict. And they perceived him to have a superiority complex. But even his father Jacob seemed disturbed by Joseph's dreams. And sometimes we have special gifts, but it's important. It's not decrying the gifts, it's not decrying what we have, but it's sometimes we need to use a little wisdom. Be a little bit wise on how you use it and approach it. So it doesn't cause conflict. They perceive, Joseph had a revelation of his destiny. He endured trials in Egypt with confidence and strength. He not only understood his own dreams and destiny, and he also could interpret the prophetic dreams of others, and in fact saved a couple of nations. And Jeremiah stated the importance of understanding how God sees you and me. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." That's Jeremiah 29 verse 11. And this week's parasha brings hope to whatever situation we see ourselves in. Whether we live alone or with a family, whether our childhood was happy or whether it was sad, whether or not we have accomplished what we thought we would do or we haven't. But God has a good plan for us, and it is entwined in his overall plan for the entire world. And it's not so much what plan he has for you, but are you in his plan? We need to find that and work in it. While the envy and hatred and cruelty of other people might have play havoc in our lives, as it did in Joseph's, we can hold fast to our confidence that God is in control. And as he did eventually for Joseph, he knows how to transform whatever is meant for evil against us to a good outcome, as it was with Joseph. And we know that in all things God works for good for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And that's where it lies, the nub, according to his purpose. That's Romans 8:28. And each of us may have to endure challenging situations in our lives as we journey towards fulfilling our calling in God. And as I often say, our lives are a lot of up and down. And unfortunately, it's more down than up. And that's life. That's the way life is. But treasure the high times. Carries you through. When times are the darkest, when we've fallen in the pit, either by those who've sinned against us or even sometimes our own sin, our own foolishness, we can take heart because that's not the end of the story. It's during life's dark times that the light of Yeshua comes the brightest. Yeshua said, "I am the light of the world, and anyone who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." It's John 8, verse 12. And although today believers face increasingly dark times, they are learning to be resilient, and that's important. In the centre of this darkness, Yeshua can shine his light through you and me. And many pressures and temptations are there in the face of believers today. Not necessarily any more than there have been in the past, but at least it affects us. And you think, oh, that was for them. But it's important that we see it for us today. He was not one just to take the path of least resistance. That's Joseph. Joseph was a man of great integrity. And when presented with a challenge, he worked diligently on it and through it. He turned away from temptation. That's really important to understand. He turned away from temptation, even though doing so landed him in trouble. Now, we need to set bottom lines in our lives so that when the temptations come, we will not capitulate. And I was interested to when the scriptures says one of the sons, he put it in the right order, he got married to this young lady and then she got pregnant. Not the other way around. Sometimes we've got to put bottom lines in place. We've got to make sure that we're going to walk right before God. And sometimes it's blooming hard sometimes. And we say, God, you know my desires. He does. And waiting is so painful at times. And it is. even though Joseph's integrity brought him much tsuzuris or hardship, it also earned Joseph a unique and important place in history. What do you want to be remembered for? And there's many guys out there at the moment where things are coming out of the closet and it's being exposed. And they've done great things, but they're not going to be remembered for them. They're going to be remembered for the things that God has said, I'm going to expose one day. We've got to be so careful. It's so important. Because we want to be remembered for the wonderful things, for the things of God, and for the things that we have been able to bless others with and do. Not the things that, even though we are forgiven for them, that they can sometimes be brought back. It doesn't mean we should feel guilty all the time. Don't get me wrong here. Okay? There's no condemnation in Yeshua. Okay? He has set you free. Don't worry about what other people are thinking or saying. And that in itself is an exercise we've got to sometimes do. Did I get in the right order? Perhaps most tellingly is the one of Messiah's titles in Ben Yosef, son of Joseph, a name depicting the Messiah as a suffering servant who would bear the sins of mankind, yet be despised and rejected by his brothers, his people. In this way, Joseph perfectly foreshadows the Messiah, Yeshua. We've also seen Joseph's brother Judah, who was respected among his brothers. And in fact, he gained the privilege of leading the people of Israel instead of Reuben. Reuben did the nasty. Well, not so much the nasty, it was something that was totally against what God said. You know? So Judah was there. But guess what? He couldn't keep his pants up either. Man. Right? Yeah? It's an interesting one. Sometimes the scriptures are quite R25. In this way, Joseph perfectly foreshadowed Messiah Yeshua. He had the unseemly affair. Judah had the unseemly affair with Tamar. Yet from this continued actually the succession line to the promised seed of the woman. So God's ways are different from ours. Man, we would have hung, drawn and quartered, and that was the end of that, wouldn't we? Yeah. God is right, shows right through. God is so gracious. His mercies are new every morning. It's just incredible, isn't it? It just, wow. And the seed of the woman who would ultimately crush the head and wipe Satan's effect out forever. It's a picture of the conquering King Messiah who will return to lead our people, his people, in eternal victory. It says, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." That's Isaiah 43, verse 1 to 2. And if we submit to the fires of purification, oh, that's hard at times, and trust that with God by our sides, we will not be burned. Then God will exalt us in his perfect way and perfect time to fulfill your destiny. Throughout the process of purification, we can be very uncomfortable and perhaps even painful. But it's the best and very thing that will set us free. Refiner's fire. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory and honour when the Messiah Yeshua is revealed. That's 1 Peter 1 verse 6 to 7. There's 3 other gentlemen who had an amazing experience. Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. They also experienced fiery trials. They were thrown, bound into the fiery furnace because they refused to bow down to a golden image. God was faithful to them, and a 4th man was seen walking in the fire with them. And we know that was Adonai, or Yeshua incarnate. In other words, before he was born. And when they emerged from the furnace, they were free. The bonds that tied them had been loosed, and not only were they not burned, but they didn't even have the smell of fire on them. No even smoke. Wow, that's Daniel 3. And when we walk through fiery trials with God, and Yeshua by our sides, we're going to come out of it much better off than before. And if we stay faithful, we're not even going to smell of the smoke of the effect. Another beautiful aspect of the story of Joseph is the clear prophetic message that points to the Messiah. In fact, the similarities between Joseph and Yeshua are actually very striking. The following are some of these similarities. They were both shepherds of their father's sheep. It says, I am the good shepherd. That's in John 10 verse 11. They were both their father's beloved sons. It's fine for God because he only had one son. So of course he was afraid because he only had one son. They were both sent by their father to their brothers. I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Matthew 5 verse 24. And they were both hated by their brothers and rejected and treated unjustly. And Yeshua was taken to Egypt by his father, who was warned by an angel to go there to save Yeshua's life. And Joseph went to Egypt. And others plotted to harm them. It's both of them. They were both tempted. They were both redeemed. They were taken to Egypt. They were both had robes taken from them. They were both sold for the price of a slave. They were both bound in chains. They were both falsely accused. They were both placed with two other prisoners. One was saved and the other was lost. They were both 30 years old at the beginning of their public recognition. They were both exalted after suffering. They were both brought salvation to the nation Israel. They both brought bread to the people. It says, I am the bread of life. It was for Yeshua. John 6 verse 51. They both forgave those who wronged them. Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they do. What men did to them, God turned to good. Even the salvation of many people. They were both considered dead, but later discovered to be alive. Their brethren vowed never to bow down to them, but eventually they did. Their brothers at first didn't recognize them, but later came to understand who they were. And it's really important. Those last two points especially are very prophetic in their light. They gave us such hope of what will take place between Yeshua and his brethren, the Jewish people. Just as Joseph's brothers mocked him and vowed they would never bow down to him, so do Yeshua's Jewish brethren, my people, also refuse to bow down at the moment to Yeshua. The idea that Yeshua could actually be the promised Messiah to most Jewish people is still a very preposterous and not happening notion. They laugh at it, they mock at our faith. However, one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Yeshua is Lord. At the name of Yeshua, every knee shall bow in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. That's Philippians 2 verse 10. And just as Joseph's brothers eventually came to recognize his true identity when he declared, Anai Yosef, I am Joseph, so will his people, the Jewish people, Yeshua's brethren, in the fullness of time see him as the true Messiah of Israel and the Saviour of the world. One day a great reconciliation will take place, and he will say to his Jewish brothers, and I, Yeshua HaMashiach, I am Yeshua the Messiah. In that day the Jewish people will see him for truly who he is. And just as Joseph's brothers wept in sorrow and fear, so will the Jewish people mourn for him as only a son. They will look at him who they pierced. And yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. In Zechariah 12 verse 10. In the Haftarah, it connects to the parasha through the theme of justice and perhaps oppression, as well as the reference to selling the innocent for silver. And they sell the innocent for silver, it says in Amos 2 verse 6. And rabbis connect this verse to Yosef being sold as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. There was inflation, of course. For 1,500 years, 20 pieces of silver inflated to 30 pieces. When Judas, who was betrayed him, saw that Yeshua was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. And while the 20 pieces of silver were a common price for a redeemed slave, 30 pieces actually was compensation for a gored slave. In other words, one who was now become a permanent slave of choice. Yeshua was pierced for our transgressions. If the bull gores a male or a female slave, it says the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver to the master of the slave, and the bull is to be stoned to death. Exodus 21 verse 32. Judas was offered 30 pieces of silver in fulfillment of the Messianic prophecy, which states, so they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And Amos prophesied judgment against Israel for the sins committed by the affluent people of his day, including legal corruption, improper treatment of the poor, and other ethical, moral failures such as the following: selling the innocent for financial gain, denying justice, so the oppressed, and treating women as objects, of sexual gratification and defiling themselves through idolatry and cruelty to the poor. He asked the Israelites, can just judgment come to a town if the Lord has not caused it? One of the important things we need to understand is God is in control. And when judgment comes, it's because sin is the reason. God is attentive in the way that we treat others. He sees how we deal with each other. He sees how we deal with those who are in need. And it's important, it says, give to those that can't give back. Be generous in your dealings with people. Mutual love and respect is foundational to all ethical and healthy relationships. When we use someone for our own selfish purposes, especially those who are vulnerable, or when we fail to care for the poor and ignore the cries of the orphans and the widows, we diminish ourselves. We don't do right. In fact, it says it's more important that we do that than fast. Isaiah talks about the fast. Isaiah. Really important. We need to see things from God's perspective. And since each person is made in the image and likeness of the Creator of the universe, such behaviour fails to grasp how God sees people. And it's important that we see it. As I said before, how God sees people. And when we are right with Him, we'll also make every effort to be right with each other. We talked about that last week, didn't we? Making sure that we put things right. Amos understood that the Israelites had to repent and turn back to Him. For the Lord told them, seek and live. And the situation today in Israel and around the world is not much different from the time of Amos. And all of us desperately need God. Mankind is empty and lost without Him. Hence, each individual needs their own relation with God. I can't stress that enough. Each of us really need to know where we stand in God. Total relationship. Mankind is empty and lost without Him. Hence, the prophet Joel and Peter, they quoted Joel in Acts, declaring that in the last days Adonai will pour out His Ruach, His Spirit, on all flesh. So there will be no excuse for anybody. It says He will pour out His flesh, His Spirit, on all people. And they will know. It's interesting, it's of interest that Peter thought it was actually the last days back then. It's interesting, isn't it? And that's how he wrote it and that's how he said it. So he says, as in the days spoken by Joel. Now, interesting enough, and this is a bit, maybe a bit revolutionary for you, or controversial, however you might like to think. It says, in fact, you can retrace to Joel 3 verse 1, and it actually says, so it will be afterwards. Now, that's an interesting one. And I say, after what? Joel 2 verse 21 to 27 basically says, after the full restoration of Israel. So this is an interesting concept. We read scriptures and things then just jump out and you think, I've never seen that before. I haven't seen that part of the equation. And yes, you can use some things in different ways. But it's really important to actually read what it says there. It says, never again will my people be ashamed. Has that happened yet? No, it hasn't. Hasn't happened yet. Never will my people be ashamed. You will know that I am within Israel. And that's when Yeshua, Messiah, actually comes back to Israel. And then it says, then I shall pour out all my spirit upon mankind. Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? It's up to you to decide whether or not you agree with that theology or what. It's your responsibility to study it for yourself. And there could be a number of stages of things that go with it as well. I'm not decrying that. But it's really important to say that, in my view, that's how I see that Joel actually wrote it. Because he dreamed about it. He saw it. He saw it in the future. He was speaking prophetically. That when Yeshua returns, never again will my people be ashamed. And I will pour out my spirit on all mankind. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, your God reigns. And that's our responsibility. So this week, this coming year, to do the same, to introduce people to Him. Because He is coming. Hayavo, Yeshua. Yeshua, Jesus, is coming. And coming soon. Shabbat Shalom. For the Aaronic blessing. Yaviraka Adonai Yavismaka. Ya'e Adonai Panav Elecha V'hunaka. Yisha Adonai Panav Elecha V'yashem Elecha Shalom. Adonai bless you and keep you. Adonai make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Adonai turn His face towards you and grant you Shalom. Go in peace and enjoy Shabbat.